Greetings and welcome to the Maisha Kazini Conversations. Today we are honored to have Professor Michael Mwenda Kithinji, who is an Associate Professor of History and the co-director of the African and African American Studies program at the University of Central Arkansas. He is a recipient of the Ohio Academy of History 2011 Outstanding Dissertation Award, the Bowling Green State University Graduate College's Distinguished Dissertation Award for 2010-2011, and the BGSU History Department's Friedman Dissertation Award for 2010-2011. His research interests and teaching interests are in colonial and post-colonial Africa, education and intellectual history, policy history, and Pan-Africanism and the African diaspora. His book, which we are going to talk about today, is entitled The State and the University Experience in East Africa, Colonial Foundations and Post-Colonial Transformation in Kenya, which was published in 2018 by the University of South Africa Press. The book investigates the dynamics that have influenced the development of university education in Kenya and the wider East African region in the colonial and post-colonial period. So welcome, Mwenda. I hope I can call you Mwenda.
Yes, thank you. Yes, that's my name.
Yes, this is relatively informal.
Yes.
I just want to say I was so excited to read your book. And when I saw that you won a dissertation awards, I was not surprised because the book is so well done in terms of the archival research, and I hope the Kenyans who read it can see what is possible in terms of research. So maybe you can start by telling us, how did you come to this topic? You know, what is your education journey and how did you land at this topic that you did for your dissertation?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Yes, my education journey, started in Kenya, just typical journey. I went to school. Most of my schooling, I did it in my home place in Meru. And then I ended up at the University of Nairobi, where I was admitted to study education. So I pursued Bachelor of Education at the University of Nairobi at Kikuyu campus.
And your teaching subjects were?
History and Kiswahili.
Oh, okay.
Yes, those were the two teaching subjects. So now, let me say, like, my interest started with history. So I've been passionate for some reason, from primary school. I liked history so much, I easily excelled in it, and I wasn't just excelling in it. I was interested in it. There were other things I was excelling in, but I was very interested in history, because one thing that I came to realize later is my curiosity in history was because I wanted to know how things came to be. Mm-hmm. So, whenever, things that are happening today, in the current, world we are in, I would always wonder why they came to be. And of course, when you ask that question, why things are the way they are, you have to start digging. And of course, you end up, doing history in the process. So that was my main it's curiosity, I would say, that drove me to really like history. So, at the University of Nairobi, when I was admitted there, I was admitted to study history and Kiswahili. Those were my teaching subjects, and of course, education. In addition to history and Kiswahili, there are those classes that you take of education foundations, and whenever I sat in history of education lectures, I remember we used to have a professor called Professor Mayo. I think he passed away not too long ago, but he made history of education very lively, in those huge lecture halls at the University of Nairobi. But there was also something else that was going on when I was at the University of Nairobi. These were the last days of President Moi, and universities were very chaotic. I joined the University of Nairobi in, I remember, September 1996, and barely 2 months later, we were out in the streets, demonstrating, protesting, and university was closed, and we were sent home.
Report to the chief. We report to the chief who used to report to the chief.
Yes.
Did you become a KANU member? I became a KANU member because of those reports.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. Chingisa. I was there.
You're going, okay. So, so it was a very chaotic time, and it left a lasting impact, because of, every semester, if a semester went by without, university being closed, then, that was something significant, and, very awful things were happening. Still in my first year, a student leader was killed, was assassinated in the dorms, the dorm that we were in. It was called Solomon Muruli. I don't know that you remember. It was national news. That was 1997. So many things were happening. The universities were crumbling. We used to go to attend lectures in lecture halls that were leaking when it rains. So it wasn't conducive environment. But we were, still we persisted, and managed to do well. But it's during that time that as we are studying all these things we are studying, I became very curious about why is the situation is like the way it is. Of course, I had an answer. It's obviously the bad leadership that we had, but still, that persistency of wanting to understand really, even how did we end up with this kind of a government that did not care about its people, its young people, young, elderly, anyone, common, ordinary wananchi. So that persisted. So when I completed in 2000, I graduated, and in 2000, Kenya was doing very bad economically. I think economists were saying that year the economy contracted. There was a negative 0.2 contraction. So the point is, we were not employed. I think we were among the first a bunch of university graduates who studied education who were not posted to teach.
As we received our letters before we graduated, we already had our postings for TSC.
Yes, that's how it used to be previously. I remember even when I was joining University of Nairobi, my parents would tell me, you'll be lucky because it's only teachers they are posting nowadays. They're the only ones who are getting employment. But by the time we finished, there wasn't anything, even for teachers. So when I graduated, I did well. I wanted to continue with my, postgraduate studies, but I did not want to study in Kenya. I didn't want to study at the University of Nairobi, and University of Nairobi was the Nairobi and Kenyatta, those are the premier institutions, and you can imagine if these institutions were the way they were, it was not a good place to study. So that's when I started looking for opportunities in the US. And luckily, I got admitted at a university called St. Cloud State University in Minnesota to study history. There was a professor there from Uganda who liked to mentor, Africanists, people who are studying African history. And as I was sending, inquiries, emails all over, he told me, hey, I'm looking for someone, and send me, apply, and I got my graduate assistantship, and that's how I ended up in the US. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Then,
so
when you went, did you know you were going to study history of education, or you were just open to anything?
So I was open, but at the back of my mind, I knew I wanted to investigate his education. Okay. So because of course I'd been now trained as an educator, and I understood education issues even more, in a deeper way. So I had an idea, a very good idea of what I wanted to study. So which was a good thing, because when I got there, he told me, you're doing your master's, but you should plan to to continue and do your PhD, and you better have an idea of what you want to do. So I told him I actually do, so that made it easy for my for him as my mentor, but also for myself. I didn't waste much time. I started researching education. Yeah.
All right. I mean, just to let Kenyans know, this book is so good with the archival research. It goes into the details of what people were thinking when they were starting to think of university education for Africans. And actually, there are a number of things which you say which surprised me, which I didn't know, and which I'll ask you if they also surprised you. But before we start, let me just say, I don't know whether this is what you have seen, but for me, when I started talking, especially publicly, about education, I now started trying to do the research and find out what is out there on education. And I had this frustration, which maybe you can tell me if I'm correct. The research on education in Kenya is so focused on the what you call the commissions, the task forces, the reports, and there's not enough critical appraisal or contextualization of all these events. And that is why your study stood out for me in that way. I don't know, am I wrong? Because I'm not part of the field, but that was the impression I got.
Yes, you're very right. You're very right. So actually, this relates to what you were saying earlier on. When I came to study in the US, during a master's, I started reading, trying to look at the works that have been done on education in Kenya, and I couldn't find anything that was really, that was contextualizing these commissions. It was this commission said this, and then this commission said this other thing. And so there wasn't anything comprehensive. So, which was a challenge for me. So, and I started looking at South Africa. So I had another professor who was South African, and I was telling him the frustrations I'm facing when trying to, to do secondary source research on education in Kenya. And so he told me you can do something comparative, try to look at South Africa. And in fact, I ended up writing my master's thesis on colonial education in South Africa. So as a master's student, it was easier to find secondary source, enough secondary sources that would help me to gain good, grasp of the field before doing research. It was easier to do that when looking at South African education system. So my thesis at master's level was on South African education, colonial education. So when I now went to do my PhD, and I was very lucky again because I did my PhD at Bowling Green State University, and I did it there because of a professor who is known as, his name is Apollos Noah, a Nigerian professor who studies education. So he actually has one of his, he has a book, one of his books was kind of, a breaking ground work on the history of higher education in West and East Africa. So, so when he saw my master, when I contacted him, when I was looking for PhD now, and he read my thesis, he was like, I think you should come here. So as you can study higher education in East Africa in a more detailed way. And he understood what that challenge that you're describing very well. So now, at PhD level, there was more, research, you have to have funding, right? So especially now when I'm in the US, my research is in Kenya, you have to have, funding to be able to do that. So I knew about all the commissions, I'd studied those commissions when I was studying, doing my undergraduate in Nairobi. So
yeah, we used to be told in the foundations classes, this commission, this report, this, yeah.
Exactly. So so there's more to the commissions. Commissions do not just appear, there's the politics behind those commissions. And that's what I wanted to investigate. So so during my PhD, that's where now I got funding. I spent several months in Kenya at the National Archives, and I also did other research other places, especially University of Nairobi, at the basement of Jomo Kenyatta Library. There is an archive there, which that time, I hope it's not the same way, but that time it was a very dusty place. So, no one was really doing anything there. So, but it was an archive, and I got some good material there for my research. And so, the thing is, when you're studying education, commission reports are what are available easily. You can just Google commission reports and you find them, right? Getting to understand, why these commissions were set, that is an additional work, which is even more difficult. Because it means you have to sit down in archives, go through many files, trying to look for information, and then try to put that information so as you can build a story, to understand why did these commissions, happen? Why were they set up? So yeah, so that's why, no other, I didn't find any book in, like, for many years, like when I was doing my master's and when I was doing my PhD, I kept on hoping a book will come out that will make my work a little easier, but nothing came out.
I mean, for me, I was so frustrated because, for me, you saw me debating CBC, and I was doing it on the heat and of the moment and my instinct as a teacher. So, people quote for you Odhiambo report, Koech report, I don't know what. And then I now had to go look for those reports, which are, like you said, are easy to find. But what surprised me is that those reports had no bearing on the discussions. None. So, then I started to wonder, why are people always quoting these reports and they're not talking about the substance of these reports and when they were written and the political reasons for which they were written. It was so frustrating. But even as I'm complaining about that, there's even less research on the actual experience of teachers. So for me, that's my project now. I want to write what education looks like from our, what these policies look like. I mean, people have talked about their biographies, but nobody interrogates what the policies look like from the perspective of the teaching staff. So that's why, again, I was so keen on your work, because it gives us the details of all these commissions.
You're very right. There is a lot to be done. There's a lot of research to be done on education in Kenya, a lot, on teachers,
pedagogy, there isn't much.
Pedagogy, there's a lot to uncover. It's a little sad considering the number of universities we have, which are producing teachers. And, you'd think education research, would be a priority. But obviously it's not.
Like in fact, now that you've said that, I've remembered, there was a time I was in charge of the education program. So the majority of applications we got were from administration. Imagine, it was so rare to get history, philosophy. I never saw even one of all the applications we got. I never saw a philosophy of education applicant. And teaching technology. All of them were administration. So it's about headmasters, prefects, how are people doing with the PTA? What is the unions? How are they doing? So at one point I started asking, how come we are not getting many people in these other fields? And I was told it was because TSC at the time had told people that you only get leave of absence for 2 areas, curriculum development and administration. So everybody was going into those fields. So we had so many prefects, I don't know who, headmasters, principals, TSC, NAT, and very little about the actual substance of education. And that's something, it bothers me. It really bothers me because it explains why we are so inept at discussing education as a constituency, even as academics.
Imagine philosophy of education should be major. That's education without philosophy means you're hollow. What are you doing?
I know, but maybe things have changed, but that's something that really surprised me. So, okay, we go to the book. Sure. Really good book. I really liked it. I enjoyed reading it. Maybe you can tell us what were, how, when higher education was starting in Kenya, I was so surprised to discover that University of East Africa was started after Uganda and Tanzania gained independence. That's not the popular narrative we have of the East African Federation. And also Nyerere's role in this story. You broke my heart on that one, I think. I was surprised to hear that Nyerere was part of that push by the British to form the federal university for East Africa. So what was the interest of the British in university education? And then also, where were the missionaries in this story? Because the missionaries were so strong at the basic education, but what did they have to say about higher education?
Yes, so those are very good questions, important questions. So higher education in British Africa, so West Africa and East Africa especially, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, really is a post Second World War period story. And before the Second World War, the British were not interested in providing Africans with higher education. Because higher education means investment, and colonies were not places to invest in, especially investing in the people. They did not want to provide social welfare to Africans. It was a place to extract, wealth and take it back home, home being Britain. So in basic education, of course, that role was left to the missionaries. And the British government was happy with that arrangement, because the missionaries are providing Africans with the kind of education that they wanted Africans to get. Very basic Christian education, which, will make Africans acceptant mainly of the mistreatment that they were going through. So missionaries were serving the empire in that role. And missionaries themselves are not interested also in providing higher education, because it didn't benefit them. They wanted Africans to know just how to read the Bible, and basic arithmetic. That's it. But in the especially in the late 1930s, and this started in the Caribbean, in places like Jamaica. Jamaica, Caribbean and Africa were the same. They were all colonized during this time. So these people started protesting in the Caribbean. Major protests, people protesting over low salaries or bad working conditions, lack of social welfare, things like those. So, and these protests became so major, so big, that the British had to react to these protests. So they founded a royal commission to investigate what was going on in the Caribbean. And this commission, it wrote its report in the late 1930s. It said, we are running a slummy empire. Those were actually what it was. We are running a slummy empire in the Caribbean, but also in Africa. And because this our empire, the way the conditions of living of the people are so poor, we should expect more of these to happen. Similar protests. So not just in the Caribbean, these will spread. And they were right, because even in Africa, Africans had started to protest. They had started forming some kind of trade union, some kind of political organizations, the independent churches, which were also a form of protests. So it was just a matter of time. That's what they told, Britain, that this will also happen in Africa. So what we should do is you should institute colonial reforms. And then the Second World War broke out. So, of course, there was a disruption of everything because of the war. But even during the war, as the war unfolded, with Britain focus being to win the war, they also attempted to address the concerns of that Royal Commission, and they appointed another commission. Now you're talking of commissions.
Yeah.
Which is known as Asquith Commission. This was in 1943, and the Asquith Commission now was charged with the responsibility of looking into how the colonies in Africa and in the Caribbean would develop higher education. So for the first time now, so this is part of now the colonial reform that had been proposed by that Royal Commission on the Caribbean. So the Asquith Commission is the one that came up with the idea of creating 3 universities in Africa. One in Nigeria, another one in Ghana, and another one in East Africa. So in fact, initially they wanted two. They wanted one in West Africa, another one in East Africa. But West Africans protested so much. They said, Ghana and Nigeria cannot share one university. So they ended up creating 2. And then Makerere, which Makerere had been there as kind of a technical institution, for the Ugandan, mainly for the Ugandan kings, and children of the royal families there. So it was the one that now was transformed into, an East African interterritorial university. So,
and what was the thinking that, was it to create an elite or just to pacify people?
So that's now the colonial reform. So
okay.
The Second World War actually, yes. So the Second World War actually accelerated what had been happening in the 1930s. The fact that, of course, Britain was losing, the colonies were becoming restless.
Mm-hmm.
And now due to the war, many Africans fought in the Second World War.
Mm-hmm.
And it was apparently clear that these people who had fought in the war would become a problem for the empire. So now the British decided on a new kind of reform of the colonies. So instead of continuing with the kind of system they had before, where Britain had something called the indirect rule, where so the British officials were at the top, and then Africans would be ruled by their own chiefs, right? So now they decided to create a small elite of educated Africans. Chiefs were mainly illiterate. They were not, the British called them traditional leaders. So, so they were mainly, not Western educated. So now the British decided to start creating a small class of educated elites who would now become their agents in the colonies. So they thought these elites they would easily control their people. And the other problem that the British were facing is that in the 40s and in the 30s, there was an emerging small elite class of Africans who had somehow acquired basic education in the colonies, and then they went abroad, to the US or even to Britain, acquired higher education, and they were attempting to come back home, but there was nothing for them. The way the colonial administration was set up, Africans were not supposed to be highly educated. So, and these now had become the agitators. They're the ones who had started agitating, forming political organizations and so on and so forth. So the British wanted to find a way to control them. And controlling them is now making them partners, allies in colonial administration. Right. So Makerere was supposed to serve that role. And Makerere was an affiliate of the University of London. So University of London, the professors at the University of London, in fact, the British created something called Inter-University Council, which was mainly an institution, an organization of British academics who would oversee the curriculum of Makerere and even the universities in Nigeria and Ghana. And these institutions were affiliates of University of London. That's why they were university colleges. They were actually not universities. They were university colleges. So
and were the British academics involved in this? Were they aware of that political agenda, or it was just in the air? It's just the, it was just the logic of the system.
They understood it. They understood it because actually British academics were the ones in these commissions, like the Royal Commission, the Asquith Commission. That commission was mainly made up of British academics. So they understood their role. They understood that they needed, there was a need to reform the colonial system. And of course, to them also, these were many liberal-minded academics. So
they were thinking, they were thinking that let's help the Africans. Exactly.
Yeah. To them, it's a good thing they are doing. They were, these people are the same. They are similar to missionaries.
Secular missionaries.
Secular missionaries, yes. So they were secular missionaries. So yeah, so they are thinking they are helping to uplift, the African and all those ideas, that they have used for so long. So, so the British academics were connected with the Colonial Office. So there's something here that happened during this time period. There were divisions that occurred in the empire. So the setting up of these universities, Makerere and the others in West Africa, was done by the Colonial Office. In East Africa, especially where there were settlers, white settlers, the white settlers did not want Makerere to exist. They were against it. And even the colonial officials in East Africa did not like Makerere. So Makerere was forced upon them by the Colonial Office, who were connected with who were allies with the British liberal academics. So so when you see, like, in the early 50s in Kenya, the missionaries, even the missionaries, again, did not like Makerere. But the whites in East Africa were very much against the Makerere. They used to call it, there's a quote I found of these whites. They were calling it a center of African degeneration.
Meaning that Africans are not served by education. It goes against our natural being.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So how did we get to, like I said, I was so surprised about this University of East Africa being formed after Tanzania and Uganda got their independence and just before Kenya got theirs. How was that acceptable to the nationalists? That was so surprising.
So it's the thing about nationalists is we tend to think of them as people who had, who are deep intuition, who are really, informed, and of course they weren't. They were. Many of them found themselves in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
So they really, some of them did not even understand what was. Some of them, they had gone through colonial socialization. They had acquired Western education. They had been, indoctrinated, to think the way the colonialists wanted them to think. So they didn't have, many of them did not have a mind of their own, really. So so in this period, in the 50s, of course, the Mau Mau happens, and the Mau Mau was a good thing for the Colonial Office. So it's ironic because what happened is that now the resistance, the colonial, because of the Mau Mau, the Colonial Office was able to neutralize the resistance by
the settlers. Yeah.
Yes.
That's another thing that surprised me. I didn't, the way Kenyans talk about colonialism, they think the settlers and London were on the same page, but they were not. And that's something I just discovered this year. I didn't even that one I didn't know. We have a bad historical memory.
We were told history. Ruto said history is about studying Vasco da Gama. It's not, So, so because of the Mau Mau now, the Colonial Office took charge of higher education fully without any resistance, because the settlers now are relying on the British government for their security. So they do not have a say as such, So in the 1950s, of course, there was the rise of African nationalism, agitation, and the British now decided to assert, to agree to some of the demands by Africans. So Kenyans were demanding a university, especially the Asians, Indians, right? So somehow Indians, when you read the book, it's there. Somehow Indians ended up being main key figures in the founding of
University of Nairobi. Yeah, I was surprised by that also.
Yes.
There were too many surprises. I was like, what?
So in the 50s, the British now decided we have to expand university colleges. So as you can create one in Tanzania and another one in Kenya, and then we'll bring all these three into the arrangement of what they call the University of East Africa. So, but initially, before it became University of East Africa, when they founded these universities, they were all ended up being affiliated with the University of London, just like Makerere, right? So, but then they realized that independence was coming, and if we leave them, so if independence comes, these countries might end up breaking up the affiliation with the University of London and make these universities, make them independent. And then the British should not be able to control these institutions. So they decided, it was a preemptive move. They decided, let's now create University of East Africa, like an umbrella, institution, where these university colleges will become affiliates. And then that will be able to have, an easier, way of overseeing the institution. So University of East Africa came into existence actually in 1963, right? The same year that Kenya became independent. Already Tanzania and Uganda had been independent. So the point about Nyerere that you raised. So Nyerere was educated by the British. So he was thinking it's a good thing. But also Nyerere had something else. He had been thinking about creation of an East African Federation, like, unite the three countries into one. So he was hoping somehow this arrangement would help to facilitate the creation of a federation. So that was partly why he accepted it. But he didn't just accept University of East Africa, like he even accepted the A-levels, the introduction of the A-levels around 1961,
Talk about that, because sorry to interrupt, but again, that was another surprise. The A-level was introduced, so it sounded like it was introduced solely for the purpose of limiting the number of Africans who enter university. And that one surprised me, because it became idolized later on. And I think you even mentioned it, that it was idolized by the African politicians.
Our academic legacy is that elitist, British elitist legacy. And even the A-levels in Britain, was something that just had been introduced around the Second World War period. So it wasn't something that had existed forever, even in Britain. It was just introduced, and it was introduced as a mechanism of control. So creating more, sorting barriers, sorting and selection barriers. And it's something that was introduced by the what are called the Oxbridge, these Oxford and Cambridge elitists.
Yeah.
Yes, elitists who did not believe that higher education was for the masses. So they wanted to make it. They wanted to make higher education as elitist as possible. Just very few people should ever get to universities. And even when you look at the University of East Africa, that was the philosophy behind it, that we should have very few people going to universities. We need just to create a small elite class that we can control, and this elite class will indoctrinate it, they'll just be our clones, there in Africa. So and they really feared democratization of higher education, because if you democratize higher education, then it will be difficult to control Africans. So, and now who knows what will happen if you don't control them, So they wanted to make higher education as elitist as possible. Now, that's a contradiction, because African nationalists were talking about, all these opportunities that would flow once independence comes. But to them, they were not even thinking that, introduction of A-levels would end up, making university education elitist. They were not thinking in those lines, which is sad, because some of them had gone to school in Britain, not in Britain, but in the US, which had a different system, a system which was more, well, for lack of better term, more democratic, So, so themselves, they were beneficiaries of an American system which was more acceptant or more accepting. But when they came home, they were okay with the British elitism, So, so those are the contradictions that are, with our founding fathers.
In fact, that one will take me time to wrap my mind around, because, it reminded me of how, I went to the A-level system, and I used to be so conscious of the inequality, because, when you're talking with your family, friends, and neighbors and relatives, they tell you they don't have Form 5 and 6 in their schools. So basically, it was decided that they were not going to university, even though they were in high school. So I was so conscious of that. I was really conscious of that. So when I found that in the book, I was like, oh my God. I mean, and the other thing I remembered was that there has always been a contradiction between imperial interests and the, you know, the Pan-African kind of interests of the nationalists, because normally the Pan-Africanists want to use cooperation, regional cooperation to promote African interests, but they are being supported by the imperialists. And that's what happened with the, you know, this Bologna process that was forced on us. It started as, oh, we are reviving the East African community, but Bologna was sponsored by the EU. And when you ask the Kenyans who are doing it, they say it was a regional vision. It wasn't an imperial one.
Yeah. So Bologna conference, you know, is the one that ended up giving financial support to the University of East Africa. And the thing is, if you want to control something, you should finance it. You know, if you finance it, you are in charge of it, right? So they went there and they raised funds for the University of East Africa, and of course that ensured that they were now in control. And if you look at some of the things that they even were discussing, like the curriculum, you know, university curriculum, the Americans who attended that conference were they were for an American kind of an American system, you know.
What was that about? Because I was thinking when I was reading that, I was thinking, is it that Americans want Africans to get higher education, or why are they concerned about the inequality?